At a bar or bat mitzvah, it's not unusual for parents or relatives to present the young adult with a talit as a symbol of the mitzvot, the responsibilities they are assuming as they take a step toward maturity. And often the presenter will whisper a loving word of encouragement to the child. Others will share a bit about the significance of the moment, but usually a ritual object arrives with a story. Perhaps it was a talit that was purchased on a trip to Israel in anticipation of this simcha, or maybe it was the one that swaddled this child at their baby naming or bris. Often the talit is a family heirloom of some kind, having been worn by an older sibling, a parent, or even a grandparent. At a recent bar mitzvah, when the parents rose to wrap their son in the very talit that the father had worn, a gift bestowed by his own father, the parent could not speak. Emotion literally took his voice away. Yet symbols carry their own message, even when they are not accompanied by an explanation. As this bar mitzvah boy stood before his parents, adorned in a timeless Jewish coming-of-age symbol, the VOA, the voices of our ancestors spoke. Such is the soft power of tradition, one which is passed from generation to generation, l'dor v'ador, which speaks without words. The voices of our ancestors makes me think of the VOA, Voice of America, which was recently shut down after 80+ years of broadcasting, a casualty of the overall purge of USAID, of which VOA was a small part. Though small, VOA was the ultimate expression of soft power. Reacting to its closure, diplomats, politicians, reporters, all included that very term in their comments. Like a dayenu of political goodwill, soft power generated support, benevolence, and kindness by meeting material and emotional needs of recipients. When our nation provided food and medicine to people in developing nations, those donations created a positive response among the recipients. Who wouldn't bless the giver for providing life-sustaining sustenance? Soft power. When our country provided expertise to overcome agricultural challenges, such as irrigation and waste management, leading to arable land and greater food production, or sent surgeons to repair obstetric injuries and cleft lips, allowing patients to return to communal life when heretofore they had been shunned. That is soft power. When our government sent poll watchers to ensure free and fair elections, that too was soft power. Dayenu. In old movie terms, America was one of the good guys wearing a white hat. A little more background. After the Second World War, the Voice of America, also known as Radio Free Europe, or Radio Liberty, or Radio Free Asia, or the Voice of Cuba Broadcasting, among many others, broadcast in nearly 50 languages, reaching some 350 listeners weekly, primarily offering news that was not available through their own national outlets. The VOA pierced the walls of silence, including the Berlin Wall, as well as the censorship so many nations imposed on their citizens. It offered the listener reliable and honest news about what was taking place in the world, and more critically, in their own country. By promoting these values of democracy, VOA was a threat to any authoritarian regime which required its citizens to conform or refrain from questioning their national agenda. Again, soft power. Michael Abramowitz, the most recent head of the VOA, noted, during the Cold War, the VOA was a lifeline for those living under tyranny, and its mission is equally relevant today. Our agency was an important instrument for combating false narratives about the United States that are pushed by American geopolitical rivals like China, Russia, and Iran. There are countless stories of people listening to the voice of America, huddling under blankets to muffle the sound, lest they be exposed or denounced by a neighbor for listening to subversive radio broadcasts. Those discovered, punishment could mean prison time or worse just for tuning in. For more than 8 decades, VOA listeners worldwide derived courage and inspiration while listening to the news. Each broadcast implied, in America, it is possible to speak the truth about what is happening in one's own country. In America, it implied, access to knowledge and information is welcome and shared. It also implied this is the way Americans communicate, where one may speak freely and question without concern. Soft power with a big message. And isn't this what Passover is all about? Freedom, precious, fragile freedom. Last night, whether you read from the Maxwell House Haggadah or one that you customized online, every account of the Exodus from Egypt requires us to question freely and without a filter. Every Haggadah includes and celebrates a variety of opinions. The traditional telling includes a child who actively disparages tradition, yet even they are welcome to voice and share their views freely. We make room at the table for every perspective, even the ones we disagree with. What is the soft power of this holiday tradition? That these voices of our ancestors speak through us to sensitize ourselves to the time in which we live, to ensure that the words do not remain just a story belonging to long ago ancestors who suffered cruelty and were later redeemed, not only to illustrate God's might, but for the sacred purpose of identifying with all those who have experienced oppression. In every generation, tradition insists we must translate our knowledge into action. When we experience injustice in our own time, in our own lives, in our community or nation, we question, we invite discourse, and we speak out. The voices of our ancestors demand that we not forsake our values. And what happens when we lose our voice, or simply refused to use it. The collection of American sermons written during the Second World War, entitled Agony in the Pulpit, begins with a preface by Elie, who wrote, "I am obsessed with silence because of the silence of the world. I do not understand why the world was silent when we needed its outcry. Where were the humanists, the leaders, the liberals, the spokesmen for mankind? The victims needed them. If only they had spoken up, the killers would not have killed or would have killed less. If they had spoken up, the slaughterer would not have succeeded in his task." In June 1933, at a town hall meeting in New York, Rabbi James Waterman Wise wrote, "It is difficult for Americans, Jews and Gentiles alike, to understand the silence of President Roosevelt in the face of one of the great human disasters of our time. The tragic and needless sufferings of the Jews in Germany are such that it should have been impossible for the President of the United States not to have spoken a word of warning and condemnation to the German government. I am aware of the niceties of diplomatic procedure and the amenities of international life. But in a crisis such as exists in Germany today, diplomatic discretion must yield to moral indignation." Moral indignation. In a report from September 14th that same year, Rabbi Stephen S. Wise addressed a gathering at Carnegie Hall, bringing the disturbing news of an unusual act of self-censorship when he reported, "Jewish communities in the provinces of Germany have decided to abstain from all synagogue services celebrating the Jewish New Year in order to avoid anything that might be considered a provocation to the Nazis." Abstain from Jewish life. Identity as a provocation to the government. Just being who you are was a provocation. Looking back at history, we understand what a fraught time it was. With full knowledge of the Holocaust and the looming threats to one's very life, we cannot judge their choices. But could it have been different, as Wiesel rhetorically asks? We hear a deafening silence today. The many who have been targeted, universities, law firms, politicians, and individuals, have weighed whether it would be better to speak out and hold their boundaries or capitulate. For some, the cost is financial, but for all, there is a moral cost. Each time a bully wins an argument, he is emboldened. Capitulation does nothing to divert attention or provide protection from future harm. Stephen Levitsky, a professor of government at Harvard and the co-author of the influential 2018 book, How Democracies Die, said, "When you see important societal actors, be it university presidents, media outlets, CEOs, mayors, governors, changing their behavior in order to avoid the wrath of the government, that's a sign that we've crossed the line into some form of authoritarianism. Looking at life on campus, Michael Roth, the president of Wesleyan University, said in a March interview, "This is the greatest pressure put on intellectual life since the McCarthy era, and I think it'll be seen in the future as a time when people either stood up for their values or ran in fear." Yale professor Timothy Snyder, an historian of the Holocaust, views this moment through the lens of history as well. As a scholar on authoritarianism, just yesterday he discussed the complicated relationship which is embedded in the promise to fight anti-Semitism on campus, an objective that is widely hailed by many, albeit for different reasons. Professor Snyder asserts that the real target is to constrict the work of the university, while the stated concerns about anti-Semitism are merely a distraction. The goal, he says, is to inhibit free speech and open inquiry, because that will limit the intellectual influence of the university. However, Professor Snyder notes, bringing Jews into this equation creates friction, unnecessary discord with other faith groups on campus and off. And so when a student is detained, perhaps even deported under the guise of addressing anti-Semitism, in his assessment, that association makes no apparent sense. But what it does imply, he said, is another message which is obvious to those who are acquainted with history. The message is that Jews are in control, that everything that happens, right or wrong, is in the end the responsibility of the Jews. Snyder explains that specious assertion is a fundamentally anti-Semitic way of seeing the world, perpetuating age-old tropes. So the very claim that the administration is fighting anti-Semitism on campus is erroneous, because this behavior actually foments it and makes the Jew a scapegoat. These are the voices of America, then and now. So when we have to choose between silence and giving voice, let us choose voice. The remedy for free speech is not censorship, but more speech. When the world is dark and silent, Elie Wiesel said, Jews invent new hope. May this be our portion. Chag Sameach.